who were the first groups of people to really open up Africa to Europeans? And my answer has always been the explorers. So it was the explorers. I've gone back and read some of the things they wrote, and they really described our African communities in a very degrading manner. So just because they didn't understand our cultures, they just resorted into putting up their own opinions, which really gave a lot of Europeans the wrong picture.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Welcome to Represented, the podcast. I'm Aniki Shuru, racial equity coach for online business owners who want to be intentionally inclusive by building a business that is racially equitable. I created this podcast to normalize a conversation around racial inclusion so that fear is no longer the barrier that gets in the way of doing this work. This isn't about perfection, it's about progress. Whether you're taking your first steps or you're well-versed in the journey towards racial equity, this space is for you. So welcome home, friend. Let's get started.
From coast to coast, around the globe, we are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
One of the privileges of having a podcast is that you get to meet the most incredible people who are doing such important work. This week on the podcast, I am having a conversation with Valerie Keter, and I've just finished recording. It is a long conversation, and it might have to be two parts or maybe just the one part, but she has to come back on the podcast. She is so well-spoken, soft-spoken, and she's very methodical with how she shares. Every time I asked a question or made a comment, she took us back. She gave context, and then she unpacked. She is wise beyond her years, and I know you are absolutely going to love her. But before Valerie comes on, here is a little bit about Valerie. She is a filmmaker and a content creator based in Nairobi, Kenya. Valerie is on a mission to ensure African history is preserved and passed down for generations to come. She uses her platform to challenge harmful narratives and spark conversations that honor Africa's rich heritage. Without further ado, here is Valerie Keter. Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Represented Podcast. Today, my friend, it is so special because I have my Kenyan sister all the way from Kenya. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this is the very first episode of Represented Podcast where I am having a conversation with somebody from back home. Valerie Keter, welcome. I'm so happy to have you.
Thank you so much, Annie. I'm really delighted to be on this podcast, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
I remember when I found you, I was scrolling on my phone on Instagram, and because of obviously the work that I do as a racial equity coach and the subject matter that interests me, your post started coming up. And I think one of the first ones that I heard, and I don't know if you remember this one, is where you talk about the name Karen, the suburb Karen, and you begin to talk about the history of that name, where it came from, and how we still have names from back in the colonial days that we use them,
Yeah.
and we don't even understand where they came from. And oh, wow, I was like, I need this history lesson. And so I clicked follow, and I've been following you ever since. And I knew at some point in time, Val, we were going to get you on the podcast. Is this something that you've always been interested in, African history?
Yeah, definitely. Growing up, I spent a lot of time watching documentaries, but the documentaries that were available on TV, specifically National Geographic and Discovery Channel, were focused on other cultures. So I kept asking myself, how come we do not have anything from Africa? Is it that our history has disappeared what's wrong with our kind of history? Why is it not being shown here? And then I realized whenever African content was shown on TV, it was kind of to it sort of made me feel bad about my culture, my country. For example, those the stone buildings in Zimbabwe. So when they brought this up, Mapobungu, I believe that's the name.
Yes.
So or the stone buildings. So the whole documentary was based on kind of saying that this was not built by Africans, that the only thing that was built by Africans was mud buildings made out of dirt. So it's just the huts, those are the only things.
Mhm.
So most of the time the documentaries were like that. So after when I joined filmmaking is when I realized that I could now this was my chance
Yeah.
to put forward stories by Africans because we're more than that. We're more than the hut buildings and the hut dwellings. As much as these are things that I'm actually proud of because I know hut dwellings were a kind of it was a survival mechanism because
Mm.
these were the things that could survive back then. Yeah,
Yeah.
because most of the times African societies wanted to live in harmony with nature. So you didn't want to put something up that would survive forever and ever because you want the people coming after you to have space to live. Yeah.
Ah,
So
wow.
yeah, my interest is basically based on representation, as you say. Like, I want to make sure that African history is taught and it's well known by everybody because I know so many people know about Marco Polo, but who knows about these other famous African kings, Mansa Musa of Mali, all these people. Yeah, so we need to let these stories known and make sure that everybody is really proud to be African and to have African heritage. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Wow. So many things that you've shared there. And especially
Yeah.
giving context to the fact that how we did things, there was
Mhm.
logic behind how we did things. We didn't just build those mad hats just to build them because we were being primitive or we didn't have resources. There was logic behind that. There are, descendants who are going to come. We want to live in such a way that we're not occupying the whole land and making it not livable for the generations that are going to come after us. Wow, I did not
Yeah.
even know that. Now, Val, growing up, did you grow up in a setting where being Kenyan, being Kalenjin, was it something that was really like placed in, like, was it what's the word that I'm looking for? Was it something that was highlighted as you grew up? For me, and the reason why I'm asking that, for me, I grew up in a home
Mm.
where we spoke Kikuyu. I'm Kikuyu. We
Okay.
went up country to Nyeri, where my parents are from, often
Mm.
and spent the night
Yeah.
there in the village. So pretty much knew my heritage well and can live in the village communally and understood how things happened there. And then obviously came back to the city where we lived. But was there something that was passed on to you in your growing up? Because not many
Mm.
people of your generation are that interested in historical facts or knowing this is where we came from, or these were the kings and the queens
Mm.
and the kind of kingdoms that reigned in Africa. Where does that interest come from?
Yeah, so growing up, I think it was not intentional, but of course, my parents spoke Nandi Kalenjin in the house. So, I mean, if you want to hear the gossip, you'd have to understand. So,
True.
so like understanding the language, one thing I kind of feel like it came naturally. I don't remember anyone teaching me, so
Mm.
I just found myself understanding Kalenjin. And then in terms of the stories, my dad is a very good storyteller, so he has a lot of stories from back in the 70s, back in the 80s. And so whenever he tells these stories, I'm intrigued. Even up to now, when I post anything either on YouTube or online, he has something to add. So there's like so many things to learn from. Yeah, like literally, I can count so many people in my family who have endless stories and are willing to share with us.
Mm.
So that's I can say that that's also a big influence on my part. Yeah. I think I forgot to mention you when we first started speaking, you talked about the names, the why Karen was named Karen and all these things. I
Mm.
think I forgot to mention something there. So there's so many names here in our country, Kenya, together with other African countries that are colonial.
Yes.
So you have Lake Victoria. That's one of the
Mhm.
things that people keep saying. This needs to be changed. It needs to be changed. But we are just talking for now. I don't know when we will begin making moves on that front. Because the other day I posted something about Mount Kenya and I mentioned a glacier known as Lewis Glacier, and people were mad about it. They're like, we need to change that. How come it's called the Lewis Glacier? Who's that? So I'm like, so this thing has been there for the last 60 years. You guys are mad because I've said, I've talked about it. Now, we need to change, yes, but we need to make actionable progress because we can talk, yes, online, but these are some of the things that I would want to see us really moving forward and changing these names, if at all it's possible. Because I know something like Victoria is going to involve 3 countries. Yeah, so
That's right.
yeah, yeah.
Oh,
So there's so many other physical features, but one thing that I'm glad about is Lake Turkana, which was known as Lake Rudolph back in 1985, and then it was changed. Yeah,
oh,
so that's at least
wow.
one thing we should be happy about.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Oh gosh, I love this so much. And as you were speaking, I was thinking of Forest Road that got changed to Wangari Maathai.
Yeah, yeah.
Highway or road, and so fitting, and what a way to pay our respects and tribute to the work that she did in
Mm.
afforestation and all that. And so coming back, Valerie, to this work and the research that you do, what made you want to start a channel? What made you want to? I know when you started, you were not dressing up with the masai beads and doing your hair and all that.
Yeah.
What made you want to start this?
So I kind of feel like it was by accident because in 2023 of July, I think a very big series was being shot in the country, Volume. So they were asking, so that was like 6 months after I had moved to filmmaking. So I was a graphic designer for about 5 years, and then I decided to move into filmmaking. So during that time, they were asking if anybody is interested in coming in to just see how things work,
Mhm.
like let's say as an intern or something like that. So I saw it as an opportunity to show up. So I was supposed to make a video, send it over, and then wait for the response. So I did make my video, but then nobody reached out. But during that time, as I was making this video, editing it, I was actually seated in this room, just editing. I enjoyed this process and
Wow.
I said, I need to make something else. So I picked up a book I was reading, I posted it online, and the response was really big. But I knew I did not want to review just any books.
Yes.
So I decided, okay, how about I review movies? So I was watching Shaka Ilembe at that point. Yeah, and it's something historical. So I decided to review that, and also the response was really good. I was like, okay, you guys are interested in African stuff. Let me bring more. Yeah, so that's when I started looking at other African stories that I can share instead of waiting for movies to show up so
Mhm.
that I can share them. Yeah. So
Nice.
um so that was now in 2024, I think. So that's when I became intentional with the content. So which means I had to schedule time to shoot. I had to take time with the editing. I had to think about the processes. How do I make this content better? How do I reach a bigger audience? So I started looking into it as now a social media strategist because at the time I was also doing my master's at USIU in communication. So one of the courses we took was social media strategies and digital media strategies. So I kind of transferred the knowledge and used it to push my content further. Yeah, so it's been really interesting. And recently, now that you've asked how come I decided to come with the outfit, so I looked back at the content that I've created already, and I asked myself, how best can I improve this? How can we make this better? So I looked at the lighting because I've gotten a lot of feedback. My lighting is too dark because I love the cinematic type of setting. But now the audience said they want light. I was like, okay, you'll get the light. Yeah, so I lit up the space and yeah, started shooting like that. And for the attire, yeah. So the white collar, I already had it. I had it like for 4 years. It was just sitting in my wardrobe. I
Wow.
hadn't thought of wearing it like I used it for, I think it was a work event. Yeah, I used it for a work event back in 2021. So I just brought it out and I was like, let me wear this. And so to accompany this African content, I was like, yeah, let me show up with the outfits. Yeah.
Yeah, and it gives it so much more authority when you speak wearing that attire. It elevates the content to another level. We don't just scroll past. We're like, hey, she's saying something. Let me listen. There's a seriousness to it that comes through. Um, I want to shift the conversation now and talk about colonization. And this might be the bulk of our conversation because this is something that I talk to my students about a lot and clients because I'm trying to help them understand how they can be more inclusive in their business. So here,
Yeah.
I'm based here in Australia, and majority of my clients are white online business owners who are serving people as coaches, as creatives, as consultants, and they want to understand how can they be more inclusive. And other parts of the world, clients from the US, from the UK, from New Zealand, and there's just this missing piece of understanding. And colonialism is a
Mhm.
huge piece in understanding racism and
Yeah.
white supremacy. And one of the stories that I normally share with them, Val, when they come through my program, I have a program called Represented that teaches them. It's a 10-week program. And one of
Mm.
the stories that I share with them is my mom, when she was running her restaurant, she had a restaurant in the heart of Nairobi. And she ran it for many, many years, I think over 30 years. And in that period of time, I remember the waiters, when they saw Wazungus, Wazungu is the name, Swahili name for white people, they would almost drop what they're doing, almost like break cups and plates, running to the Mzungu to serve them because there was something different about serving a white person. They would get a lot of tip, by the way, because when they were tipped, it was a different currency. And, the exchange rate, if you're coming from any other part of the West, the exchange rate is very favorable to them. So when they left a tip, it was a lot. And so they would ignore the locals and go straight to the Mzungu and serve them. And it wasn't just there. I observed it in other places too. And then I
Mm.
stumbled over your post where you shared about how waiters will run to the white person to serve them. My question is,
Mm.
even though we've been an independent Republic of Kenya for 60 plus years, what is
Mhm.
it how are we still doing things that are tied to colonialism? That's one example of the waiters. But what other
Mm.
examples are there that we're still operating under the impacts of colonialism?
Yeah, so this is something that I've observed before, like on so many instances. The only difference right now is I thought it was normal back then. Yeah, before really critically looking into it, because the systems that were set up by the British colonialists back in the 50s, 40s, probably just before they left, because at that point. they're from the World War II. They've spent a lot of money. The US has now surpassed them in terms of who rules the world.
Mhm.
So they're looking at ways of consolidating their wealth, especially in the colonies before they move back to England. So during that time, there are settlers who'd already established themselves in a way that it would be difficult to go back because there's no space. Because first we have to remember the reason why we have colonialists coming to Africa was they were looking for space also for their people. That's why Kenya moved from being a protectorate to being a colony. Europe was overpopulated. Let's just say it. Yeah, so Europe was overpopulated, and then you're in a capitalistic environment. So if you want to survive, you want to thrive, you move to another place where you can siphon resources, bring back, sell them. Yeah, that kind of thing. So they decided, since some of them couldn't go back, how about we set up the systems in a way that will still benefit those who remain? So
Mhm.
this means, in terms of education, there are specific schools for the white children and other schools for the African children. Because if you look at schools like present day Kenya High, it was European girls filled with there are pictures we saw. That's the high school I went to, and there are pictures that we saw back then of just white girls in the school. So as much as later on it was converted to African schools, and this happened as the white children were moving to the international schools. Yeah, so it's still segregated up to now. Chances of you finding let's say settler child in a national school, very minimal, or in a public school. You'll
Yeah.
find them in the international school. So it's still segregated, but in this way, they've segregated it in let me just call it fair manner based on what capitalism has brought. Capitalism tells you everyone can work hard and get themselves where they need to go. So the Africans that have managed to work hard can take their children to the international schools. But the rest of the population, you can only go where your money can fit. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the schooling system, it's just remained the same. Now you can't say it's segregation because we're in a capitalist environment. So it cannot be segregation because nobody has denied you the opportunity to take your child to that international school. Like you're allowed, but do you have the money as a normal Kenyan? Yeah.
Oh.
So aside from schooling,
Hang on. We can't just pass by, we can't just gloss over what you've said because that is, oof, that's huge. That's a huge, I've just gotten a huge aha moment here. The fact that it is through wealth. The wealthy are
yeah,
the ones who get to decide where they go to, and then it's not viewed as segregation or
mm,
discrimination. It is really viewed as it's those who can. And so you
yeah,
aspire and you work hard. And just I know you have another thought process there, but just to interrupt, because this ties in with what you're saying, I
mm,
saw, I think it was a video on social media where there were people who were stopping the locals, and this was in the coast, from
mm,
accessing certain parts of the coast that have certain resorts where they would
yeah,
let Wazungus through, but they wouldn't let the locals who are capable of, being there or want to be there. Like, why are they being
yeah,
stopped from accessing, parts of their country or to go wherever they need to go? And I couldn't believe that. This is in 2025, Val. I'm watching and I'm
yeah.
watching like in Kenya, in the tourist zones, in the coast. I was so, so surprised. But it goes to show, it just goes to explain with what you're saying there that, wealth has been used as the measure of who gets access to what.
Yeah, and this wealth was already created before the 50s. So you find that most of it will be concentrated in the settlers, including land as well. Like land in Laikipia, you find one person with 10,000 acres, and there's squatters living on the side, like there's outskirts of that land.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that education is one thing that is used very, very well, and you can't really say anything about it now because it ceases to be segregation. But uh, everybody can work at the same international schools, have other Black children
Yes.
or children of African descent. Yeah, they're there. Yeah, so I think what I wanted to add was now when it transfers to the work setting after school, with
Yes.
the education that you've received, you can only find yourself in certain situation, maybe government parastatals if you're lucky, or these other private businesses. But now the children that had the opportunity to go to international schools will probably receive an education, a higher education outside the country, probably in the UK. And then when they come back, um, remember there's this big corporations, banks, and all these things that are still kind of partly managed by settlers. I don't think it's really in the public domain in that manner, like very obvious. But if you look closely, some of those, the chairman or
Mhm.
the board members. So you
Yes.
find the same children that have gone through international schools, they'll come back and join the board and continue. So it's like for other people, the path has been set very nicely. But then for the rest of the population, you have to really work hard, really put your best foot forward and get to that position. So
Mhm.
it's not equal or equal opportunities in a way. It's not really equal. Yeah.
No,
So that's how colonialism has trickled down in that way. Yeah.
wow. It's so interesting to hear you share that because I've lived away from Kenya for almost 25 years. I've been in Australia. And there's always that thing of, oh, but we're now independent. We're now independent. We are a republican. So, as much as, yes, there are impacts of colonialism, just hearing you describe it and that wealth gap, which we know is so big,
Yeah.
how it keeps the poor people are kept poor and they keep getting poorer and poorer, and the rich keep getting richer and richer, and only certain people can access certain parts. Um,
Yeah.
one of the things that I'm also coming to understand is that how the, colonialists were able to infiltrate places like Africa was really taking advantage of our value system, the system of kindness, the system of hospitality, welcoming, people who come from different land, feeding them, extending, what is mine is yours. But they took that
Mm.
to another level. Can you just walk us through how they were able to use that to their advantage?
Yeah, so first of all, I think the reason why we were very welcoming, especially to Europeans, is because we'd welcomed other guests before. Remember the Arab trade, the
Mhm.
Chinese trade, at some point they made it to the coast of Africa. So when the Europeans showed up, this wasn't new, but we did not know the system they were coming from. They were coming from a place where they needed more resources and they had to find it somewhere. So the welcoming with the white people at the coast, first of all, the Europeans at the coast was normal. But then when they began to make their way inland and started to linger for longer periods of time,
Yeah.
that's when the different communities started resisting. And it was worse when they started building the railway because now
Mhm.
our communities started realizing that these people they intended to stay here. It wasn't a trade mission like we've seen before. Yeah, so I don't know what else to to say about that. There's so much. Like, if you can guide me with a question.
Yeah, of
Yeah.
course. I guess it is the the coming in the name of, oh, we're coming in to
Uh,
introduce Christianity,
yeah.
you need to know about God and Jesus, whoever you're praying to, whatever. trees or mountains you're facing, that's primitive.
Mhm.
That's not, civilized. And so they came in the name of certain things.
Certain things, yeah.
And in so doing,
Mm.
has robbed us so much of our identity. And we'll get into
Yeah.
the whole conversation about hair because I really want to talk about hair.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
yes, just seeing that gap and coming through and in the name of God using the missionaries, but with a whole different agenda. That's what I want us to talk about. The agenda was
Yeah.
different.
Yeah, so after, of course, after the railway is built, you have the missionaries now coming in. So I tried to look at this situation, like who was the first person who were the first groups of people to really open up Africa to Europeans? And my answer has always been the explorers. So it was the explorers. I've gone back and read some of the things they wrote, and they really described our African communities in a very degrading manner. So just because they didn't understand our cultures, they just resorted into putting up their own opinions, which really gave a lot of Europeans the wrong picture. So now you find um, missionaries setting up. Now they've gotten into their boats. They are now at the coast of Kenya. They are getting in inland, or Tanzania, or whichever country in Africa. Yeah, so when they come in, the first thing, of course, is to try and convert Africans to Christianity. But in doing so, they're disregarding that African traditional religion. And so, religions, I mean, because there were many, each community worshipped their own God, and they had their own way of worship different from others. Yeah, so when they come in, of course, it's chaos first of all, but then again, in combination with the efforts that the other explorers and the other people in administration were doing, they were able to now convert people, because you're being told that if you take your child to school, they can then work here and earn this money. But this is later in the 1940s there. So first of all, there's the other thing of how they portrayed Jesus. So Jesus was portrayed as a white man, and
White,
then
blonde, blue
unfortunately,
eyes.
yeah, white man, blonde hair, blue eyes, and
Yeah.
then Satan is portrayed as a black person or a black creature. So this made Africans start thinking that, okay, there's something inherently wrong with us and we have to repent. We have to do this. And remember, they targeted the chiefs, the people at the top there. So those were among the first people to convert to Christianity. Yeah, they're among the first people to convert to Christianity, which means that they were able to convince the rest of the population to get into that boat. And most of the time as well, there's the other thing that I wanted to mention there. So since you're having converts as the leaders are the ones really converting the rest of the population, it means that the divide and rule issue, the divide and rule tactics is working, because it involved um, taking the leadership of that community and asserting control through them instead of going up front. So it's a system that the British used. The French also used it in Algeria. So basically, they didn't go directly to the communities and conquer them. They just called the leaders aside and then exerted their control through them. Yeah, so with that, it made it very easy for many people to convert to Christianity, because if your leader has told you that this is the way, there's something called hell, and we've been worshiping the wrong God, you're likely to believe, especially if this is the same leader that has led you for quite the same lineage that has been doing this. More people started converting to Christianity. Yeah, and up to now, nobody really knows much about the African traditional religion. It just disappeared. completely. Like, and I feel like religion is something that would be very critical and very, I feel like it's an open wound. Like talking about it to Kenyans, especially, or to people in Africa, I try not to touch on that because I know it's something that they're very close to.
Yes.
When you talk about spirituality, we're talking about something different. But when you come to religion, it's like
Mm.
it's so ingrained in us that it becomes so difficult to deconstruct it. It becomes difficult to accept the facts or to accept that at some point we were lied to. Yeah, it's just a complex topic that I'm still finding ways to maneuver.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is that's a big
Mhm.
complex conversation to have. But once they got in, the infiltrating,
Mhm.
and there was something you talked about, taxation, and how
Yeah.
taxation would then happen. You talked about the hat task, hat, tax.
Yeah.
HUT, hat, a mad
Mhm.
hat, tax,
Mhm.
TAX, right? And so there was tax that was introduced in that way. Can you talk us through that? Because then it changed the playing field. It forced the people who are like villagers to go and seek employment so that they were able to pay for this
Yeah.
additional tax.
Yeah, so I think in 1902 is when the British introduced the hat tax, and at that point it was being paid as in rupees. So remember, the British had already taken over India,
Yeah.
and they were kind of now moving into East Africa to complete their mission. Yeah, so at this point also we have settlers coming in. So that's in the early 1900s. So they're coming in, but then they have no interest in staying in the country. So what does the British colonial administration do to convince them to stay? So they decide we need labor because there's land, yes, that they've already grabbed in the Kenyan highlands, but who's going to work there? So now they decide, okay, let's introduce this hat tax, which the local population now will have to come and work on your farms to earn this tax so that they can pay for it. So it then it kind of now blows up into the Kipande system because as many Africans start signing up, they have to carry this thing around their neck. So it's like a metal container with a piece of paper inside. So they have to carry it around, and this is where you have your name written,
Yes.
your age, all those particulars, including your former employers. So it was kind of like a CV that you're carrying around. So, and this was not just for identification purposes or for the benefit of the African person. No, it was to make sure that no one absconded or just disappeared from the farms. So the moment that you're found loitering without a kipande around your neck,
Mhm.
you're automatically thrown into the cell. So it was a way to curtail movement around the region.
You
Yeah.
know,
So
there's a lot of
mm,
similarity as you're sharing about that whole monitoring system, wearing
mm,
your kipande is an identification card, your ID card. Uh,
yeah.
and I think of America. And,
Hmm.
once slavery was abolished, there was still convict leasing, whereby the people who owned the land still this slave masters, they still needed people to work there, so they would then bring the people who were free. They would pay them to come and work. Again, it was like, oh, you're loitering, or you don't have anything to do, you're a threat to our families now, our women, our children. And so they were then leased back. And it sounds so similar to this system of colonization. It's like they were learning from what has happened in the different regions and how can we apply it so that it works to their benefit.
Yeah, yeah. So all these systems, remember, like 200 years ago, or am I yeah, I think, let's say by 1700s, there's so many universities in Europe, and they were conducting research, understanding the human mind, understanding the psychology behind certain things. So we were sort of dealing with people who already knew what will happen if they do this. Yeah. So by them, even the segregation thing, they already knew what happens if you, or the Christianity thing, if you keep telling these people that
Right.
this is paganism, but this is Christianity, what's going to happen in future? They had the research, they had the specialists, so it was well targeted. So that's why it was easy to deploy across the world, literally.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm. And there are a
Yes.
couple there are a couple of other things that through, when we were talking about the impact of colonization, like what have
Mhm.
been the ripple effects of that. And one of the things was how the land is used. And going back to how in the beginning you were saying there was a specific way we built our living areas in a certain way because we were thinking of the next generation. And I think of
Mhm.
how we coexisted with wildlife, and it wasn't a threat. Our living together wasn't a threat. It was a sustainable way of living. And then, colonizers come in, and it's a completely different ball game where they're looking at these animals as what can we do? How can we hunt them? And it becomes something that is a sport. It's not just for to sustain themselves. It's something that is leads to poaching.
Yeah. So, in terms of how Africans use their land, let me first mention the food and house. There's a lot of food. Let me just say, the Kikuyus in central Kenya were known to produce a lot of food, which was traded across different communities. Because, the Maasai focused on cattle rearing. So, if they needed food and food stuff, they would go to the Kikuyus and do some form of barter trade.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then fast forward to when the British arrive, the Kikuyu are dispossessed of their land. And what ends up happening is there's a recorded famine somewhere in the 20s. Yeah, I think it was in the 20s or the 40s. But I know the food was taken to soldiers during one of the wars. I can't remember the exact details, but there was a famine in the land, and it was tied to all the food stuff being taken to soldiers. And then remember again, this same land, they've been asked not to plant food stuff. They're now planting coffee, tea, cash crops.
Yes.
So at the end of the decade, you've already created a scenario where you're likely to get famine and hunger, which was unheard of back then. And that same system had already played out in India. The British had already done that, like taking the land, using it to produce cash crops so you can ship it back to Europe, produce goods with the intention of bringing the same goods back to Africa to sell it to the same people who are working on your farms to earn the rupees for paying taxes. Yeah, so it was just a cycle. It was just a very bad cycle. And yeah, so if at all the land was left to the Africans to manage, I don't think we would have famine issues, because
Mhm.
central Kenya usually has a very good climate for growing food. So if other communities from the dry parts of Kenya needed food, they would definitely make their way and buy from there or exchange with what they have.
That's right.
Yeah, so I feel like that's what was ruined completely. Yeah,
Mm.
by planting cash crops. Yeah.
That is so interesting. I did not know about the cash crops scenario or situation and how it was then sent back and what that then did and the whole cycle, that vicious cycle that you speak of. It also reminded me about mitumba,
Oh, yeah.
how, bringing clothes in from out of the country and it being deemed superior because it's of a higher quality and people want, being able to access that. I mean, the mitumba business is huge. It's a huge industry. But then what does that do to the local textile industry is also another interesting impact of colonialism.
Yeah, so basically, I think in the early 90s, the privatization of companies started. So remember, at that point, Mo is being pushed to, like test some democracy from the West. Yeah, so we're trying to move to multipartism.
Mm,
So one of the things I think he was asked to do, I don't know whether he was asked to do that or it just came up, but I noticed that as he was being pushed to introduce democracy into the country, there was also privatization of companies. And when companies like Rivertex in Eldoret were shut down, I think they were shut down or something just happened. So it was Rivertex being privatized, but at the same time, that's when Mitumba started making its way into the country. So it was like a swap. So when Mutumba came in, companies like Rivertex, any textile company just slowly died away. So by early 2000s, everybody's wearing mutumba. They're being
mhm.
told this is actually the real thing. This is nicer. This is better. But you also have your local tailors who've only been reduced to creating vitenges or these
Mhm.
outfits for weddings.
Yeah.
Yeah. But prior to that, the textile industry was thriving and you'd find so many shops. I'm told of uh, companies like Deacons or like there's so
Mhm.
many clothing shops all over the country and people
Njiris,
would
there
just
was Deacon, there was Njiris.
uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's so many places where you'd find clothes, but nowadays, people even actually prefer to go for mitumba. One thing they're not realizing is um, whatever comes into the country is actually more than we need because they're bringing in everything. So whatever is sold, there's a lot of remainders that end up in landfills or in rivers.
Wow.
So you find that it becomes an environmental problem again.
Yeah.
Someone did a documentary in Ghana and they showed a lot of clothing in the ocean. It was actually pouring into the ocean. Yeah.
God.
So yeah, we have to think about it in that way. But then again, Kenyans, in the Kenyan context or East Africa, we've been tied, our hands are tied here with the AGOA trade agreement. I think it's called AGOA. Yeah.
Yeah, I go on.
The yeah, so AGOA now allows Kenyan traders to export their goods to the US market. So if at all they decide to ban Mutumba importation, it means AGOA might be removed or scraped off, which the recent news show that there's a chance it might be scraped off, which I think will be an opportunity now to better the textile industry in the country. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, but
Mm.
there's just so much already going on locally in the country
Yeah.
right now that it's that would be a whole different conversation. But
Mm.
speaking of again the impacts of colonialism, but more so now kind of coming to the things that we see broadly, globally, when you see quotes that are called African proverb. I thought that was
Yeah.
such an interesting teaching that you shared about. There's a quote, whatever it's saying, but then it's written African proverb. There's never a name that is given to that quote. And there's two ways to look at it. There's looking at it as the communal way of how we've done things as Africans and not really attributing it to one person. but also
Yeah.
looking at it as never, the other side of it is we don't name things. We don't attribute it to the person, the community. And so
Mm.
what would you add on to that, Valerie?
Yeah, so first of all, I think that collective consciousness is big in the African societies. So it's mostly what we can do together. Because remember, there was no gain in you thriving as an individual. It didn't make sense unless maybe it's a war and you're a warrior, you've led the people. You and your whole clan would be celebrated, not you alone as the leader of that of that the army thing. Yeah. So uh so we kind of celebrated togetherness, and I think it ties into modes of punishment. So you'll see that, for example, many communities in Kenya, like if you did something wrong, let's say like really something bad, what they would do is excommunicate you from the community. So you'd be banished, you'd be asked to leave and go wherever you can go. So that is like the highest form of punishment. So you can imagine how they hold togetherness and community as a really important thing, because yeah, because there were no jails and
Yeah.
no, what's the other thing? There's so many things that were not existent that are there right now. Yeah.
Mm.
So if you're banished from the community, you're at a big disadvantage because you're now wandering around
Yeah,
without a home.
exactly. You're
Mhm.
homeless, you're not with your people, you're not connected, you're not rooted, your identity is also in question. Which brings me to, and before we get into hair discrimination, I just want to touch a
Mhm.
little bit on the film industry
Mhm.
and when it comes to color grading in the
Yeah.
film industry. This is something that I have known of, but until I had you talk about it, it just really solidified my thinking around the different color grading that is assigned to different regions of the world. Please
Yeah.
expand on that.
Yes, I think this was part of a campaign carried out by the US, like so in the 60s, I think they wanted the world to know about their cultures and to adopt it, like the American culture that we know, even the clothing we wear now, and so many things that we've adopted based on watching movies. So at first, I think it started that way. So it's a way of spreading your culture through entertainment. And then, since you've already done your research, they have all the specialists in these universities, they realize you can actually change minds based on what you put in those films. You can use it as a marketing campaign. So that's when we started seeing um, Russia, for example. Growing up in Kenya, nobody has told me explicitly, but I somehow know Russia is cold and gray. And where does that come from? From the films that we watch. No one like if Russia had put up its own like another marketing campaign for its own country, probably it would have been better, because now we'd see, okay, it's not really great, it looks like this,
Mhm,
but
mhm.
we were fed with one side of the picture. So we tend to associate certain countries with certain mannerisms, with certain characters, like whenever, apart from the color, the characters also do matter, because recently in the 2010s, we started seeing villains showing up as Middle Eastern in the films. So whenever there's something bad, it would be a Middle Eastern person that was the antagonist. But the protagonist was always the all American man or all American boy or girl. Yeah. So it showed up, apart from the color grading, it shows up in characters as well. So you end up in Africa, of course, being depicted as very dusty, with as much as we have all this greenery out here,
Yeah.
we're being depicted as it's very dusty. There's people dying of hunger,
Yes.
which of course we do not say that there's no one died of hunger. We've had situations, and at least we've explained how all these hunger issues came about.
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
But that's not
but
what
for it to be
defines us.
portrayed,
Yeah.
sorry, yeah,
That
that has
that
defined us
hmm
completely.
hmm
Yeah,
I really love how you've gotten into the nitty-gritty of explaining even places like Russia. You watch and it gives you a certain picture that then you become, it's a stereotype. You
mm,
begin to look at things through a very manipulated lens. And even going back
yeah.
to what you were sharing earlier, and I'm
Mhm.
um, just trying to remember. You shared something earlier about,
Let me add something as you remember that. So, you see the way whenever someone, okay, if you're done with your high school and you're looking for what next, so most of the people, if they're looking into universities out of the country, you'll rarely hear someone saying they want to go to Russia. It's going to be the US number one, the UK, Australia.
hmm,
Those are the first three before they consider anything else.
yeah,
So it's what we've been watching, what we've consumed, those Disney shows, all those things. We know America as this place where everything is going to be smooth. Like we've associated the global north with a certain type of life
yes.
without even setting foot there, just by watching stuff. Yeah, so
Mm.
I'd say it's a very successful campaign.
I've remembered it was what you were
Yeah.
sharing about the explorers. The
Uh,
explorers painted Africa in such a bleak manner that anybody who read that was like, oh, is this the continent? Is this the place? And I think it's those narratives and using
mhm.
those negative narratives to depict something that is not fully the whole picture. Because even here living in Australia, a lot of times
Mhm.
people will look at us who have migrated as, oh, you're coming here because you're either fleeing from conflict or poverty, or you're here seeking asylum. Something bad has happened and you've come for a better life. And whilst that story exists for some, it's not the full, complete story for everyone. For a good
Yeah.
majority came here as international students and decided to stay. And so
Mhm.
there's a different story, there's a different narrative. Yeah, that's why when just come back to the color grading, I think there's like the color blue that depicts the America and France and the UK and certain European
Yeah.
countries. And then, as you said, for Africa and certain other areas, it's depicted as dusty, and it has that look that you just feel like it's old, it's
Mhm.
ancient, it's behind, it's backward. Is how it gives that feel.
Yeah, and then Mexico is right next to the US, but they get the yellow filter. So it kind
Hmm,
of looks dusty as well, as much as it's right next to the US. Yeah.
that's right.
Then India, of course, usually depicted brownish and yellowish as well.
Hmm.
Yeah, so
And it's so interesting the psychology that is used on us as we are
mm,
consuming things, even like what you were saying earlier. You haven't been to Russia, but you will watch a film about Russia and it will give you that feeling of coldness, of just maybe not the most friendly place in the
yeah.
world to be. It gives off those vibes, those connotations. And in so doing, we are being fed, what we are consuming is really causing us to think in a certain way, is perpetuating certain stereotypes. And we believe that, and many times we can't pinpoint where that came from because it's stuff that we are consuming that we are not aware of.
Yeah, so this kind of campaign is very subtle. It just creeps up on you slowly by slowly. The more movies you watch, the
Mm,
more you begin thinking, forming opinions. You begin forming opinions about certain countries without ever setting foot there. Yeah, so it's dominant, and now I feel like it's spreading I thought it would spread through social media, but TikTok has changed the game. So we get to see, if you want to see how this island looks like, a certain island looks like, you just type the island, go check out the island, look at everything. So TikTok is kind of changing this space because nobody can lie to you. You can go ask those people directly, is it like this? Is it like this? And they will answer. Yeah.
Wow. Now,
Mm.
hair. Let's talk
Yeah.
about hair because hair is a big, big conversation. And one of the things growing up and just being brought up with afro hair, it was the hardest thing ever. If you had any amount of hair on your head, it hurt like crazy, whether it was going to the salon to get it braided or the idea of washing your hair, it shrinks and then it has to be blow dried. It was such a painful process. I remember personally as a child, but also growing up and then chemically straightening hair so that it was manageable. And that was what was, not only was it a manageable thing to do, but that was the beauty standards that, a lot of people wanted to have, but were aspiring to, or we aspired to. And
Mm.
just going back to our hair and embracing it as it is, give us a little bit of a history lesson when it comes to Afro hair and how much where this hair discrimination came from.
Yeah, so before colonialists arrived in Africa, we had so many communities had different types of hairstyles. And I'm sure you might have seen a very viral post online at some point. Someone posted pictures of different African hairstyles. So it was just different, very creative,
Yeah.
different use of materials, textures. And it wasn't that they were using their own hair on all instances. They would also create wigs or weaves out of our own hair or other materials you can find, like sisal, things like that. Yeah, so and then when as part of the control by colonialists, they had to urge people to, or they just promoted the cutting of hair because remember, first of all, hair it's a big identity. Even up to now, when I look at old photos, the way I'm able to identify this is somebody from this community and this is
Yeah.
another person from here, it's the hair that normally carries the day. The
Yes.
outfits might be similar, but if you want even to identify, to differentiate between sub tribes, you would
Mhm.
know on hair. So it's a big part of identity. So when Europeans arrived and pushed for people to cut their hair, or actually forced them to cut their hair, it then brings loss of identity. So you find a whole group of people who can't identify each other. Probably they're still really hurting from the situation. You've lost a big part of your identity. Yeah. So after that, we get into schools. Like now in Kenya, for you to have your children in school, remember at that point, the leaders of the community have already convinced people, let's do Christianity. And now the children need to go to mission schools. For you to be allowed entry into the mission school, you had to cut your hair. And remember these beads that Kikuyu women wore,
Yeah.
the married women wore, those same beads, missionaries asked them to remove them because it looked bad or it looked like it was injuring them. Yet this is something they've been wearing for centuries. Yeah, so they were asked to remove that. Children were asked to shave their hair. Everybody, and it's up to now, it's difficult to find pictures of, let's say, past 1920s of Kikuyu men and women with hair. But if you look back into 1890 something, just when the Europeans made entry into Mombasa, you'll find them with really, it's like sister locks. They've been strung together using ochre or this type of clay. Yeah, the red clay. It's not in color, but I'm imagining it's gonna be red clay. Yeah, so they've been strung together into sister locks, and that's when I was convinced that actually they did their hair. It wasn't all shaved throughout because those are the pictures we're being shown nowadays that they had shaved hair.
Mhm.
And so when children now begin to go to mission schools, they shave their hair. And for private schools later on, they decide, okay, we have to have a system, either shave your entire head or plait cornrows. And I think cornrows was adopted because it's subtle in a way, because it's simple, it's just close to your scalp. Because if you look at the other pictures of the really amazing hairstyles, it goes all the way here, like it's a lot, and it's like a piece of artwork. And
Yeah.
sometimes you'd wonder how they slept. So there was a headrest, something we call a headrest. So it's kind of like a stool, but it's smoothened out, and so they just place it over here and sleep. Because I used to wonder, like, how come they are not hurt by sleeping on those things?
Yeah.
And I have actually vowed to try it one day.
Oh my God.
Together with sleeping like on the ground, because
Yeah.
I know for certain sleeping on concrete floor is going to be different from sleeping
Mm.
on soil or on the ground. It's going to be comfortable, because
Yeah.
I mean humans have done that for centuries, for
Yeah.
years. So I
Yeah.
don't think it should be really problematic. Yeah, so hair, and it was a big part of the society. Like it took a lot of time, and this is part of the hobbies. Because if Africans are, oh, you wanted to say something?
No, no, no. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Okay. So you see, if Africans are taking their time doing their hair, when will they get time to plow Europeans' land? So, so they had to be cut.
Wow. But you know what's interesting as you're saying that is now the negative connotation that
Yeah.
is associated with Afro hair. If you
Mm,
have like you know locks, if you have dreads, there's just
yeah.
such a negative, even just natural afro that you've combed up, it is
Mm,
deemed unprofessional. You go to look for a job,
mm.
particularly in the global north, and it's just looked like you're not, excuse me, you're
Sorry.
not going to get a job if
Yeah.
you look like that. You need to look what is deemed professional. If it's that
Profession.
chemically straightened hair, if it is something that looks a little bit more European, that is more acceptable, then your chances of
Mm.
landing that role or whatever it is gives you a better chance. Where did this the whole the why is it seen so negatively, the discrimination of our hair?
Yeah, so I think that same philosophy that they had, the same philosophy that the colonialists had when they were in Africa, I think it carried on like for years without even the present day people understanding where it comes from. Then they know we want to make people, we want people to assimilate into our culture. We want them to like integrate
Mhm.
instead of separating themselves. And one thing is to make sure that in terms of hair, they kind of mimic what everyone else, the majorities in those countries are doing. So I think we need to, all of us need to understand, first of all, where it came from so that we identify that this is actually something that we as Africans were proud of, and we would want to showcase our hair in any way or manner. Of course, as long as it does not hamper the activity that we're doing, or it does not distract the work. Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I think it should be allowed, first of all, because at the end of the day, we all have to understand where it comes from. Because the main issue was um, separating the African from their roots, or making sure that it was actually going to be easier to sell them in the slave markets. Also, there's that one as well. Because if you like it would be so hard for them to do that with all that culture here. If somebody
Mhm.
spots you in the boat, they'll be like, okay, you're from here.
Exactly.
How's so and so?
Yeah.
So cutting hair was part of making sure that the systems that they were trying to create would remain intact. Because and right now, I feel like in terms of locks as well, because I have locks. Um, I've had someone told me actually that it's a man, first of all. So they have, for men, it's different actually.
Mm.
Women here in Kenya, having locks is not that, it's not frowned upon, it's normal. But for men, I think they face a lot of problems because I read the comments on my TikTok post on the issue of hair, and the people coming to say that they've been harassed severally, especially even by police officers. So a police officer will see you walking, you're just walking, you're doing your own things, you're running your errands, and they'll show up and they'll ask to smell your hands. Why? They automatically imagine you're smoking weed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're targeted as you're looked at as an outcast of the society. Like you've decided to do your hair. They forget that these were the same hairstyles, same things that really identified us as truly African, things that made us proud back in the day. Yeah. So
Freedom
people face a
fighters.
lot. Yeah, sorry.
Freedom fighters had
The
this
freedom fighters
hairstyle.
decided to to wear their locks all the way without shaving them.
Mm.
Yeah, so of course, after the British, after we gained independence, the systems that we talked about before, they had to to be enacted in a way, and of course, the hair was part of it,
Yeah.
because you're being told you're not allowed to show up at work with this type of hair. You cannot do this if you want to climb the ladder. You have to wear your straight hair.
Yeah.
And in the 70s and 80s, I think we started seeing a lot of wigs, a lot of weaves. And I've always said that waves are fine as long as they look like our hair. Like
That's
if
right.
they look like our hair, it looks okay. Yeah. But now we've been put in a position where African women are having to constantly straighten their hair to look like white people. And then when we try to fight for our rights, of course the other person is going to look at you and wonder, you want to fight for your rights but with hair like mine.
Mm.
Yeah, so I feel like it pushes us backward in a way, as opposed to really being really proud of the small elements that show up in your culture. Like if we're really proud of um let's say like the different hairstyles, the textures, because we have so many hairstyles, so many things to try out. But of course, the straight hair has been popularized by pop culture, I guess. Yeah.
Mm.
So and since not everyone is really looking into the details and asking themselves why this hair, you'll find that many people will just conform to that. Yet it's a campaign by somebody from the 60s.
Mm.
Yeah.
And beyond. And the thing is, now there's a revolution. The natural hair is coming back, naturalistas, and we're trying to
Mhm.
understand how to care for our hair. I can't tell you how many hours I have spent on YouTube learning how to do your type 4 hair, wash
Yeah.
days, routines, and finding different shampoos and conditioners that work for our hair that we have created.
Yeah.
Because once you know how to take care of it, it's not hard, it's not difficult to deal with, as they often say. Um, I want to bring this conversation to an end, and I want to ask, as we wind
Mm.
down, where do we begin to take back our identity as Africans without the influence of white supremacy? Is it even possible for us to begin to take back our identity and preserve our African history, particularly when I think of generations to come?
Yeah, I think it's very possible. We can start by making the first small steps, which means being aware that this is where we were before, this is our culture, this is what we used to do, and really picking out the progressive aspects of our culture, like taking those things that we are proud of, things that work for us in present day, um, absorbing this information. Then the next step, of course, would be acting it, like living in that, like um, if it's hair, really wearing all these hairstyles, coming up with our own products that make work easier for us to manage the hair, things like that. And then, of course, once that is done, it's going to be carried on to the next generations quite easily because people learn from seeing. If you grow up in a setup where people are doing a certain thing, you're likely to follow it. So if someone finds themselves in a family who use certain products and they wear certain hairstyles, you'll automatically follow suit. And then if you go to school, you find other people are wearing the same or really like even like a variety of African hairstyles. You borrow, you exchange. So
Yes.
it's going to be I feel like it's possible. We just need to keep going, but we have to first start with the learning process. We have to learn and unlearn. Yeah.
Nice. I want to ask you my final question, and this is a question that I ask all the guests who come on the show. And the question is, if fear wasn't a factor, how do you
Mhm.
think it would show up more in your work?
Oh, wow, I wouldn't have filters. I'd just be talking. Oh, like I think fear for me, I feel like I've gone through a lot of progress to overcome. First of all, I'll call it imagined fear, like the fear that that stagnates your progress. So I have overcome that. So right now, the fear that I have right now is really offending people because sometimes I try to communicate certain ideas, certain aspects, but some people will feel offended. So I'm really like I'm aware of these things, and yeah, I'm trying to manage that. People have grown up in different setups. They are exposed to different things. So when you're trying to communicate with them, you have to look at things from their perspective first, so that at least when you understand each other, you get into the middle ground and at least exchange information. Yeah, but in terms of fear, I've come a long way. First of all, to actually start posting online. Yeah.
And look at where it has landed you. You sharing these educational pieces that you do so well is look at we're having this conversation. Had you not done that, we wouldn't be having you share this in Australia. And so this is
Yeah.
a big deal. This is a big, big deal. So thank you for taking those baby steps in terms of facing your fear. And so, if people want to get in touch with you, what is the best way that they can get in touch in terms of getting access to your work?
Okay, so if you want to talk to me directly, my email is val@filmset.africa. And if you want to watch my content, Valerie_Keter. Keter is Keter. Yeah, so you can search online on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube as well.
Wonderful. I will have all that information for you listening in the show notes. Valerie, thank you so much for this conversation. I have loved it so, so much. You remind me of one of my closest friends, and her name is Joyce Kurgat. Joyce, if you're listening, this is your twin sister. Like her mannerisms, how you are speaking, your pace, your facial expression remind me so much of Joyce. And so thank you. I feel like I was talking to a sister indeed. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Annie, for inviting me. I look forward to another invitation.
You bet.
We are represented. We are represented.
much for tuning in. Why don't you go ahead and hit that subscribe button and leave a review so this podcast can reach more online business owners, and together we can begin to normalize racial inclusion in the online coaching space. I'd love to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where this podcast episode was recorded, the Wiradjuri people in central New South Wales, Australia. Music produced in Nairobi, Kenya by Patrick St. P. Mbaru and Kambua Mathu. Vocals by Joanne Matata.
Represented.